Over on that side.
Got it, yeah. You ever seen me on the Zoom thing? I'm trying to like figure out, because I don't, I'm parts of it.
I stopped doing speech. I'm an audio person these days. No, I can hear you just fine.
I can't tell which side. I'm kind of like trying to figure out.
This is fun, Kristen. You get to just tell me
I know.
when we're live, rather than what we do.
Caroline, how old is your daughter?
She will be a year next month.
I thought it was about it. It doesn't seem possible, but I was like, it was last summer.
Yeah. She was 11 months this Saturday.
What was August what?
August 10th.
Up on the thing? Okay.
Already.
We are live.
Okay. All right. So, hi everyone. It's great to see everyone in person again. So it's 6:03, and I'd like to call the July 12th meeting of the Bethlehem Public Library Board to order. Do we have any public participation? Anyone electronically? No. Okay. All right. So first business of order then is to review the previous meeting minutes. The minutes draft was distributed in your board packet. Do we have any corrections or amendments?
One question was the mention of a new mobile app.
Yep.
That's coming. Any ETA on that or details?
No, I mean, I have it on my phone because I'm one of the beta testers, but I don't know when it's slated. I mean, I think it's relatively soon. If they've been talking about that, you may have more.
It feels like they were talking about it before the pandemic.
Yeah, well, okay. So I would say it's months, not a year, not 6 months. It seems like a couple months. As far as I can tell, I'm really pleased with it. So,
There's lots of pull for that, I think.
Yeah. Got it.
Any other questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the minutes from, what was it, June 14th, board meeting?
So moved.
Second? Mary? All right. It's been moved and seconded to accept the minutes from the June 14th board meeting. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right. Next up is oath of office for our recently re-elected trustee, Harmeet Narang. So Jeff, we just go ahead
Just
and
read it right out.
the office. So Harmeet, you'll just repeat after me. I do solemnly affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America
That I will support the Constitution of the United States of America.
and the Constitution of the State of New York, and that I will faithfully discharge, according to the best of my ability, the duties of the office of Bethlehem Public Library Trustee.
Duties of Bethlehem Public Library Trustee.
Thank you.
Yay. I think they cheers or something.
Yay, our construction person. Yay.
So our next business in order is approval of board officers. Just to refresh everyone's memory, currently we have Mark Kissinger as president, Michelle Walsh as vice president, Caroline Brancatella as secretary, and Lisa Scoons as UHLS liaison. Mark reached out, and all officers seem comfortable, interested in maintaining their roles. If there is no competing slate or discussion, we can proceed with a vote to carry over the current slate of officers. Okay, do we have a second? Caroline, okay. All right, so it's been moved and seconded to accept the current slate of officers for the 2021-2022 year. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carries. So we'll now move on to the long-range plan, and we have a report by our architect, Paul Mays. Hi, Paul.
If I stand up here, will everybody be able to hear me?
Think so?
I think so.
Great. Bear with me while I try and make technology work here.
Thank you.
This has been a long process. We've been, as you can imagine, waylaid somewhat by the pandemic. So that has made what is typically a 9-month to a year process into almost 2 years. But if you recall, we have been having discussions regarding the long-term prognosis for this facility and this site and the services provided to your chartered to serve area for just about those entire 2 years. We began with interviews with all of the staff in the various departments, from administration through the functional aspects and patron services. We had stakeholders meetings over a series of days with various people from the community, whether from the school district or advocates for the elderly or children's programs, whatever it may be. And we also held a public charrette process. That is, we had multiple meetings wherein we facilitated a dialogue with the community regarding library services and what they mean to Bethlehem. All of that is summarized in a variety of different statistics, charts, and other information in the report, which I forwarded to you last week. I hope you've had a chance to at least skim through that. It would be impossible to go through in a reasonable meeting every single item in that summary. However, I am happy to follow up on any of those. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to give an update on where we are, and to solicit some input on some key issues that we discussed as a committee just a few weeks ago. But we're near the end of the final draft, which will mean then that we will present conclusions and recommendations about moving forward. But toward that end, I didn't want to be presumptuous, and I wanted to make sure that we could talk to the board as a whole and bring you up to speed with where we are. So before I begin that, are there any questions, if anybody has looked through in the last week, some of the statistical information, the summaries of existing conditions and so forth? I think it was all pretty straightforward. It's also been presented to the board right like a year ago, right before, a little more than a year ago, before March closed things down last year. But is everyone sort of comfortable with the process and where we are? All right. Then the meat of it from an architectural perspective and from a design and long-term planning perspective is what are the options related to providing better services to the community, and in a key part of that, what is it that the community actually wants? If you'll notice, when we talk about what the committee has been working on and the architectural focus of the various improvements, we tied them back continuously to requests from the community. It's not us sitting in a closed room around a table, but rather part of that ongoing process. I brought this slide up. You've actually seen it before, but this is just a reminder as we analyze the physical conditions of the existing site, this set a framework on which we can hang where we can do things. In other words, if we're not moving off-site, and it was very apparent early on that the location is key in terms of demographic centers and circulation patterns throughout the community, then what do we have as a site and what are our options? And of course, what we were looking at then was, this is just a sketch, but areas in which we could make improvements, we could extend the footprint of the building if necessary, and how that would affect the flow on the site, its presence from Delaware Avenue and from Borthwick, and what our options really are. You'll see, for example, Area 4 is where the Borthwick House is located, and what are our best options for improving the parking, access to the building, and so forth. So that was an early stage, and the committee has probably seen this ad nauseum at this point. We have gone through version after version. As I went back through the server to look through the various schemes, I had initially thought, maybe I'll walk everybody through the thought process as we went from scheme. But we're actually up to like scheme 6 or 7 and its various iterations. So I think to expedite things, we should probably move along. One of the key ideas in looking at improvements to the library is the fact that it may not be fiscally responsible or reasonable for your community, every community is different, to tackle the entire improvement in one single phase or one project. And so as a committee, we actually looked at how we could anticipate the various pieces of the project for improvements, and actually stage them in such a way that we created areas that allowed us to maintain occupancy of the building while moving from piece to piece, and we'll talk about that as we go along. One of the key things that had come up and ranked very highly in terms of public comment was the need for larger amenities related to meeting space. That is a larger and more comfortable and more acoustically or less acoustically problematic space. You guys are under the blower over there. I don't even know if you can hear me. Exactly. I have sat there. A space that has technological improvements and so forth, and is actually set up to coordinate with the programs that are on offer and that are anticipated to be on offer. Toward that end, phase one of a project that we had anticipated might be the inclusion, and you see the large pink square in the upper corner, of a new large meeting room. That's actually additional space on the building, and it would seat approximately 200 people. It would be a larger meeting room than this. It would be more traditionally shaped and sized for acoustics, and you can actually see in the upper, if I move my cursor, yes. So it actually then ties out to the site as well, so we could come out from the meeting space into that lawn area that's behind the berm where you actually hold outdoor programming now. So we could tie indoor and outdoor programming. For example, the summer reading program could have events inside, could move them outside. In weather, they could go back and forth. Things like book sales, all of these are actually give us a great deal of flexibility in how we use the site by expanding the footprint of the building into that area. Importantly, that addition can be accomplished, minus some of the renovations we're talking about at the entry area, but that addition can be accomplished in some ways without interfering at all with the rest of the building. And so the building can be maintained in service, meaning the library does not have to move out of the building, find a temporary space, or shortchange programs that are on offer during the period of renovation or construction. Further, the construction of a large meeting room like that is a big open space by definition. So having said that, that gives us a staging area as well, as we talk about renovating other areas. For example, when we get to the point where we might renovate the children's library, we can set up a temporary children's library in that large space because it's big and open, and renovate this area. That's in fact what we're doing at Guilderland right now. We've moved things around, and it's a shell game. We actually shift things as we go along. Some of the other renovations that are anticipated in that first phase, though, also include improvements at the entry area. So where we're looking right now that we enter the building down here, we would actually move that entry closer to the parking lot. This was also a common refrain from the public commentary regarding the length of the distance of travel from handicap parking in particular to the building. Now, the building itself is still in the same place, so that distance doesn't change, but if we can make more of an interior access, that is, that we have reached enclosure before we've gotten there, it does a few things for us. It protects against weather and other inclement issues. It expands the lobby somewhat to allow us to put accessible restrooms out in that area. It has table and chair storage as well as a kitchenette for the large meeting room. And it allows us to make changes then to these other components of the library because we've now established a narthex, if you will, an entry area prior to entering the library proper. You have that now, but it's somewhat awkward in the L-shaped corridor that you have. I do see people sit out there and study, and they do make use of it. It's an excellent gallery space. But having said that, we can close off this space with doors here and glass here, and we would have access to the large meeting room, 2 restrooms, a seminar conference room, meaning that we've now increased not only the size of the large meeting room, but added another meeting space accessible even when the library is closed, all from just this phase of the project. Are there any questions at the moment about where we're going there? I'm sorry. Yes?
I am having a little bit of a problem envisioning from where I sit now, where is that large meeting room? Am I going out this way? Where is that physical property going to be?
We're sitting here now.
Yeah.
The parking lot is up there. Your entry is here, so it's going out towards that lawn area.
Okay, so this is going, it's going sort of into that low area where we use it now, like for the,
Eating on the green.
Okay, so this, and I don't say this constructive comment, that is taking away some of our green area over there.
Actually, well, Paul can do a better job than I can. Go ahead.
It's intentionally designed to be adjacent to that. Yes, it will probably eat some of it that is closest to the building,
Okay.
but it leaves, and I apologize, I didn't pull up a whole site aerial photograph. It does leave the majority of that lawn, which extends beyond this graphic. You can see where the property line is, that goes out into that area. So the lawn remains a component of this, and in fact, the point to this was to make the proximate connection from the large meeting room to that lawn area.
Right now, the stage is at the far end of the green. You would flip that and put the stage at the back end of that piece of the building, flip the stage and put the audience where the stage is now.
Okay.
We could put the
All right.
stage here,
So
for
it's
example.
almost like going out from the side of this patio coming in. This is where that's going out? The patio, the walkway coming in now. It's almost going from the side of that out. Okay, all right, okay.
But now we've actually created, in that space where you leave that room and you enter that lawn area, if we create a dais or a stage or a covered arboretum of some sort, we can now put lighting, sound systems, electronics, all very easily accessible right from that space, to a true stage, which never really goes away. And then the lawn area would remain as a seating area, as a play area, and so forth.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I apologize, again, I was trying to simplify how many graphics I put up, but an aerial photograph or map may have helped that. Okay. You can see where...
Sorry to interrupt, but I think your next graphic is going to answer her question pretty well, because it shows the green space, once you get to it.
Get to that then.
Yeah.
There we go.
You can see there, Mary,
So Mary, that might help you there. I've pulled up, and you see in gold, that meeting room addition.
Okay.
About 3,400 square feet.
Yeah.
And you see the lawn area that remains beyond it. So we are not actually encroaching all the way into that lawn.
All right, yep.
Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Michelle. That does help that. Okay. So, having said that, let me come back briefly. One of the other areas we wanted to make sure we emphasize is we placed it into phase one because it's a little bit of an orphan in terms of where it fits with other scopes of work. But the Delaware Ave entrance could well be improved as well. Right now, it feels like a back entrance. We have vending machines there, and that's the main street. Obviously, we want to try and dress that up. So if we were making temporary entrance from that area more prominent, in the long term, we can actually put a true vestibule there with double doors and so forth. But that's the intention for that space. And then you can see that along what is now an L-shaped corridor, we're changing the way that space interacts with the space behind the wall. We will eventually be punching holes through that wall in this scheme that allow us to open the library of things and this new and popular collection into a broader open lobby directly supervised from a combined circulation desk. And it's less of a corridor and more of an open, welcoming space at the entry. Okay.
I just have one question. In this design where we have the library of things, so you come in, if you're coming in from the big parking lot, so you come in through a covered vestibule or whatever, hallway, in through the library of things before you get to the circulation desk. Considering people with handicap, is that a longer walk? It's more protected, but is it, I can't tell what scale this is. Is that 15 feet more that they go in to get? How big is that library of things?
It's actually, right now, what you would do is you would come in, walk all the way along this corridor and enter the library here. That's where those doors are.
All right, okay.
So
I had a different
we're
conception of.
actually entering the library proper earlier.
Okay, all right, yep, I'm getting acclimated to existing versus what that's showing.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the long-range plan, and we'll talk about the phases to get there. I did want to mention as well that one of the issues of the physical plants that we've identified include the accumulation of surface water runoff at the plaza area and the icing and the potential liability that entails. So this gives us an opportunity to address that in a variety of ways as well. And when we've budgeted for this phase, we've talked about doing some site work that make improvements in those areas at the same time. Okay. The second one is called Phase 2A, although the reason it's a 2A and a 2B is they could happen in either sequence. But what we tried to do here is reimagine the use of the site. And what you see is with the absence of the Borthwick House, we can create a one-way entry. I'm going to use the cursor. A one-way entry into the site with some parking along it, and a decision to go to parking or to continue along the lane and then split either into through traffic or drive-through traffic. So we've actually created a small addition on that end of the building. This is near where the maintenance stores are, that would allow us to do curbside pickup and or a transaction window all year round. One of the things we've been seeing in a lot of the libraries with whom we work has been a continuation of these new models of service that the community has appreciated and would actually like to see happen. I think it often, families with multiple kids who don't want to get out of the minivan and traipse in and so forth, all these things simplify things somewhat as well as commuters. But we have the option then of having the drive-through or parking and coming in. We've already shortened the distance to the entry, but by making it one way, we can also address some of the surface safety issues. So it does run around clockwise then, and one-way exit out to Borthwick at the upper or northern curb cut. We closed off the middle curb cut and just have the two. We've actually expanded 10 new parking spaces there and 10 at the top, and then reworked some of the areas outside the delivery area. But having said that, this is a small addition. It does have some implications on the inside and how the staff areas go, but this would rework the use of the site completely. You can see that by going clockwise, we've also re-angled all of the parking spaces to reflect that direction of travel. Now that might happen before or after 2B, which is this component, which takes the core of the building and is an integral part of the services. So you can see there are significant staff area renovations throughout, delivery and circulation staff, the maintenance areas. This is that curbside pickup we just talked about, staff break room. There are staff offices now tied to with barred light windows, indirect supervision of these spaces. Another small meeting room has been added as a study tutor room or a SOHO, small office, home office. And you can see renovations as well to the central idea of a combination circulation reference help desk. The size and orientation of that may change somewhat, but as we mentioned before, this is the current entry. From this location, we have sight lines back to how we enter the library proper, down into the children's area, and up into the various stacks. So it's actually a very central location, and the consolidation of those services is something we've been discussing with the staff and how they manage those areas. One of the earlier ideas in your plan of service was to expand passport photographs and hunting licenses and things like that. To the extent that that is still a priority, we can make spaces there as well as for reserves and holds, but it sounds like passports are probably shrinking a little in terms of priority. Up and down, okay. So having said that, this phase then really, we've added also a study tutor room down here. Here's the renovations to the studio to become another mid-sized conference room that seats in the 20 to 40 people range as well. So we have a variety of different meeting spaces. We have the curbside pickup as a permanent or transaction window as a permanent feature, and have redone the staff areas. One of the issues with fundraising, or if there were a referendum to do this kind of work, is the patron service component. It's necessary for us in order to make the staff spaces sufficient to actually provide good patron services, but it has fewer of the direct things that patrons will notice, like new meeting space, new children's area, whatever it may be. So having said that, study tutor room, conference room, we've already added a large meeting room. There's a small meeting room there. We've started to address some of those as well as part of this phase. Part of the hierarchy of deciding on the phase scopes also had to do with manageable budgets for each of them. In other words, while we didn't specify a very particular number, it was clear that we weren't looking for a $12 million phase and a series of $2 million phases. We were trying to find a more equitable balance. But within that, if we have a master plan and we know the overall direction we're headed, all of these things can be rearranged as grants become available or as specific donations that tie to certain improvements might be bound to us. That has happened to us at Kingston Library, for example. We had a series of phases 1 through 6A, but an accessibility grant came up. We moved phase 3 in forward of phase 2 and so forth to take advantage of it. By having the master plan, we were all set to know that we could do it without making it obsolete in a future phase.
Well, before you go on to phase 3, so for 2B, remind me, the net square footage addition for this was just limited to the curbside pickup area?
2B has no addition at all. 2B is only renovation because that curbside pickup addition was in 2A.
All restructuring of existing space.
That's exactly right. Yes. Mary?
We talked about a conference room. I think we're saying that that's where the studio is now. Are we eliminating the studio space in the library?
I think the anticipation is that there'd be flexible space that could act as the studio and
Okay.
kind of, well, like the studio is now, but that space, that's the studio.
To be more flexible than just studio space. Okay.
One of the things we're seeing with technology is that we can accomplish what the studio used to do with smaller devices. We can do, for example, veterans interviews or podcasts and things like that. But the space itself can also be reserved for other seminars, meetings, and so forth. So, yes, it would have a high-tech component, including automatic screens, data access, and so forth, but it would no longer be a television studio per se. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to confirm in 2A, and I know we had this discussion before, but I wanted to make sure that you have a drive-through lane and pickup and book drop. But is that a double-sized lane so that people who are just dropping off a book are not waiting in a curbside pickup line? Do you understand what?
Yes, there are 2 lanes, so when you come
There are 2 lanes. Okay, that's what I was
Right,
wondering.
there's a lane that bypasses and there's the lane here. So we have to talk about what the curbside model will be if there's a pickup window, if curbside and window transaction are the same thing, or if they are both handled separately. That's a conversation to continue to develop.
Specifically of the drive-up book drop, where you just drive up and you drop in your book because you're returning it, not a window transaction.
Right. That might actually happen elsewhere on site, as an exterior book drop with a depressible cart in it that gets pulled out. So that, as you say, if there's a line at the window, you don't have to wait in the window to just dump something through the return.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
We would likely want to supplement it. The issue with the exterior ones, of course, from a staffing perspective in inclement weather, that's a difficult thing to drag that cart back through, depending on where it is. But as we looked at it, there's the possibility in this area before you get to that queue or further on past. But that's going to involve a certain amount of public training as well to know that there is a book drop. I don't have to wait in my car in this line either. So we'll have to think about appropriate signage and intuitive usage of it.
I don't think they would expect to wait because they don't wait now.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Can I ask you, there?
You definitely wait.
Just to be clear, a process check, these are just basically conceptual things, there's nothing schematic, and it's more of a presentation of the models and not necessarily a discussion and evaluation of concerns and things at this point. Is that what we're doing right now?
Yes.
Well, we've had committee work over the last year or so to discuss concerns and go over those.
But as the whole board, at some point we'll be perhaps talking about meetings or whatever, that process. So right now it's a presentation.
I will actually, at the end of this evening, have a list of some things that I would like the board to clarify. We discussed them with the committee and said we should really ask the board a few of these things. But having said that, to me, the most appropriate move going forward would be if the board summarized their comments and they came back or were funneled back through the committee chair and the director and then back to me I can then make revisions as necessary, clarify things if they weren't clear in the graphics, for example. We look at this with focus for so long that it's obvious to us, but we have to remember that people may be looking at it for the first time. And then at some point we'll make a public presentation as well, but we want to make sure we've got your comments brought in, budgets actually reflecting the things that are priorities to the library. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm going to reserve my additional comments till after the presentation. Thank you.
As we mentioned, Phase 2B then anticipated a series of interior renovations, and then Phase 3 is really the balance of the project. Actually, it also includes renovations to these areas, but it is the essence of the children's, a new teen space, for example, that actually is enclosed in glass with visual supervision from children's staff into that space. We've taken, at the end, we continue with smaller meeting rooms and a maker space, computers and technology near the help desk, and we've rearranged a variety of things in all of that space. One of the advantages to all this then, for example, is from children's, we can go directly across the hall into programming in this room, which is a much larger space than the original program conference room, but that is also an available space for meetings, conferences, and so forth. Within this overall area, there's study tutor space, even in the children's library. There's a toddler area, a family accessible restroom, as well as a middle grade area. So it's a much more sophisticated children's library in that it establishes a sequence of age groups and collections as well as activity spaces through that area. We've maintained other meeting rooms and study lounges. And then even up at the periodicals area, you can see 2 study tutor rooms added up there as well. Again, reflecting the request from the community to have more private spaces. It's also consistent with what we're learning about a post-pandemic world of creating separate spaces where people aren't exposed to larger groups of people when they don't want to be. In the interest of efficiency, we have for now left the stacks area, which is an integral structural system that goes up through the stacks and the mezzanine above. In the long term, we have talked about other phases where that might be modified and even an addition done to the northeast if that space was needed. But given the phasing and where we were with these, that seemed a step so far down the road that we'll simply reference that it is a future possibility, but it is not necessarily something that is a priority at the moment. In looking at the budgeting for each of these phases, as I mentioned, we were trying to find palatable numbers that reflected an ongoing improvement of services and spaces. And as we budget, at this stage, we are applying square foot numbers. For example, you are a public school district library in the way you're chartered to serve. And so we have prevailing wage rates, we have Wick's law and the various public bidding components. So reflections of cost have to pick up on some of those items, but you can see the amount of money that's being put into the entry plaza, the demo of the Borthwick House, the 2 additions, the large meeting room and the small vestibule, and then renovations in some of these areas. That's about a $3 million cost in terms of hard costs. And then we've added furniture, fittings, and equipment, FF&E, as well as contingencies. There are 3 separate contingencies on every one of the budgets. The first is called a design contingency. That does not go to the design team. The design contingency is a percentage of money that's kept aside as we develop what is a very conceptual drawing into more detail, so that as we start to look at ideas, we don't have to say, no, that isn't in the budget to every single thing that comes up. So an example might be, we'd like to put window seats under each of the windows there and create study niches or learning booths, things like that. The design contingency is intended to actually add features, and that number then gets rolled into the construction cost estimate. The escalation contingency is to anticipate the escalation in costs or the inflation between now, when the budget is put together, and that future time at which it's actually constructed. And then the construction contingency itself is so that when there are unknowns, as there always are in projects, when we dig in the ground or open a wall and find things that we did not expect. There's a whole series of other soft costs that relate to design fees, construction manager fees, testing, inspections, and so forth. In all, phase one is estimated or budgeted at this conceptual level at about $4.3 million.
Which phase or phases have asbestos removal?
I believe it's going to be the next, it's going to be phase 2B, where they renovate the air, because the primary means of hazardous material issues are related to that
Okay.
area, that have been deferred from previous projects. If we looked at 2A, which was primarily the parking lot and a small addition, as well as some renovations, and there actually, we have a lump sum in here for some hazardous material removal there as well. We're at about $2.2 million. There is some furnishings involved because of the changes to the curbside pickup and window area, the contingencies. Overall, phase 2A is about $3.2 million. So we looked at 4.3 and 3.2 for those first two phases. 2B has more addition areas and renovation areas, and this is where that larger, Mary, you asked about the larger hazardous material removal. That's that $115,000 in there, as well as building envelope improvements that we've identified in the existing conditions report, from masonry to windows and so forth. But the hard costs here are mostly renovations. They're limited to $1.9 million, and then we have FFE and the other components. So this is under $3 million for phase 2B. We could certainly combine 2A and 2B into a $5 to $6 million project, but again, the number of variables there are infinite in terms of how we combine or rearrange things. And then phase 3, because it's taking on the entire balance of the rest of the building and all these other components, with the renovations, they're about $4 million. This has no change to the footprint of the building, but it essentially takes the entire rest of the building and brings it up to the same level of detail and newness that we've achieved in phases 1 through 2A for the rest of the building. That totals at about $6.7 million overall. Now, if we were doing this, if we added up those three phases, including 2A and 2B, they total about $17.3 million. If we did it as a single phase, our estimate is that it would be around $14.2 million because of a number of factors. One, we would be removing the escalation contingency out of several of them, in that it would be happening all in one phase rather than extended over a period. You can see escalation here is 8%, whereas at phase 1 it was only 2%. The other is an efficiency of scale. A larger project will cost less per square foot because contractors are mobilizing once, they're doing one amount of work. There is, in fact, less overhead because of the size of the project, and it's more attractive as well to larger contractors. There's a lot of coordination involved with that, though, because we do end up having to play that shell game on the run, which, again, is what we're doing at Guilderland right now. As a space gets finished, we move something over and keep moving. But to use that as an example, it is certainly possible, and it is something that we do all the time. So, in general, those are to answer your question, Shirley, the conceptual ideas for how the phases might be broken out. There was background throughout the report regarding the things that we are adding, including a connection to the outdoors, larger meeting space with better amenities, many more small meeting spaces, including Sohos, study tutor rooms, and so forth. A reflection of the collection size, better staff services, and opening up the sort of closed corridors that are here. Throughout, although I didn't mention it specifically, there would be upgrades to the mechanical, electrical, fire alarm systems, and so forth. So that's a general update of where we are. I do have a few items Harmeet, I don't know if you would put, when we last met, the committee had a list of questions I went through. I can go through these, but I'll stop here first and ask if there's any other clarifications to the conceptual level that we're at here.
I do have a question. Say the library wins the lottery, and we're able to do this all in one go. How long would it take, start to finish?
When you say start to finish, are you talking construction, or, see, throughout, there are different processes we have to follow. So there's a design phase where, we don't just turn around drawings overnight. We would have to develop these to a level of detail that they can be publicly bid. We would have a construction manager on board to do budgeting and timelines and schedules and so forth. But the construction of this overall is likely an 18-month construction process if you're doing this all in one compressed piece. Maybe a little longer depending on where it falls in the season, because the site work can only happen at a certain time. We would want to try and budget the timeline in a way that you take advantage of the fact that school projects, for example, have to happen in the summer and finish by Labor Day, which means there's a shortage of labor. There's generally somewhat of an uptick in the cost of materials. But one of the biggest issues is trying to bid things in that time, because even if the contractors are larger and have bidding departments or estimating departments, the subs whom they hire are often gunning to get things done by Labor Day. So we find it much better to be able to bid something either very early in the season, January, February, or wait until Labor Day and do it in September, October. The advantage, depending on which of the components we're doing at a given time, is that interior work, which keeps contractors busy through the winter, is golden work for them. They can't be working in the schools. They're looking to keep their crews going. You can get better pricing that way because we have that advantage. Now, as a library architect, I'm also always conscious of the summer reading program. That's always a big deal. And we would have to talk through with staff the best scheduling so that we minimize interference with the other programs as well, and think through the strategy of how we're going to provide temporary services to a building that is perhaps completely under construction, as opposed to a piece of it at a time, which is sort of easier to close off and allow to happen over there. There are certainly certain areas, the remediation and air monitoring and things, that would probably dictate that the building be closed for a period of time when those things happen. But the rest of it we would have to work around. You will get better pricing typically, letting a contractor have free access, having contractors have free access to the entire building and not having to worry about, in that way the pandemic worked for some libraries who were ready for construction and weren't open for full services. Obviously, we're coming out of the tail of that, and we don't have that advantage anymore. We have to think through the politics and strategy.
I have a question. I was on the school board and I went through at least 2, if not 3 bonds with them. State Ed has no part in the review of materials or for the library, or no?
It does. You are chartered as a school district public library, and the school district owns the building, and therefore we have to get the building permit through the state education department. So the earlier question about how long does it take, before construction even begins, I mentioned we have to do drawings. There's also a review process at State Ed. There was a time where it would be 12 weeks, then it went up to almost 12 months, and now it's back to a more reasonable time. SED did offer something called an expedited review, which institutions could pay extra to have them reviewed by an outside third party. But having said that, we lately haven't had that much of a problem. It's a knowable problem, if you will, and we can anticipate if we want to be out to bid here, let's back up 3 to 4 months, get it submitted to SED here, which gives us as much time to work on it.
It's my experience is 6 months to a year.
That was, and when we did our HVAC project, we were at the 1 year part of that, and it was
depending on what level and the different stages. I mean, I haven't gone through, I get it's a school district, but I haven't gone through 3 bonds. I understand that. The other question I had is, the school district actually does construction year-round. It's just a matter of how it changes projects. So just to revise your recommendation, there are clearly some things that they will do and schedule through the summer. But the construction, if it's contained, the district's do year-round, construction on their buildings.
I certainly understand that, but the big rush is what I was getting at, is during the summer to get as much done as possible, and that's when other institutions, because they're typically the same contractors, often have difficulty getting good pricing
And then my, question about the process is, I would assume, or, I'll put it out there, that the board also goes through a process of deciding, the hiring of the architect, the hiring of the project manager, the hiring of, the construction firm. I'm not sure to what extent the architect handles that at this level. At the school district, it is, the board is going through that process, with the director of O&M. But obviously, you don't have a director of O&M here, but, does the board of trustees engage in the hiring of the construction manager and the architect and the construction, so that all adds?
Yeah, the contractor, in my experience, that's what the bidding process is for, so you have less control. I mean, obviously, the board has the authority to make the decision if they meet the requirements of the bid. But yeah, that's the board's job to decide that.
Okay.
As a separate institution, although chartered at the school district library, the board does have the authority to enter into those contracts. The hiring of a contractor, though, is subject to public bidding requirements, and therefore the lowest qualified bidders and so forth. All that process has to be followed. We don't get into.
Right, I understand the bidding process, but so that also may add time as you're thinking about, putting out interviews for, and again, from a bigger project, interviewing architects, interviewing construction managers, interviews, so that depending on what level of engagement the entire board wants in the project, that will also add time, as far as I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
One of the areas that will be affected as well is, I had mentioned FE throughout, the furnishings, fittings, and equipment, and most often we purchase those through state contracts. That is, that the library has the option to select things that have essentially been pre-bid by the state, and that then guarantees that we are getting exactly the furnishing lines and options that we specify, rather than putting it out to bid and comparing somebody's chair to somebody else's chair to a third person's chair. So I realize I've taken up about 45 minutes, but maybe I can hit just a few highlights that I would like you folks to consider amongst the other things that you'll be discussing regarding the project. One of the key things from my perspective, those of you who've been in the process long enough know, as library architects, we are very committed to making sure that we're reflecting your community. And as such, we've been reviewing various documents that were done long before we were on the scene, for example. And so going back to earlier plans of service, as an example, sustainability practices and NYLA's Sustainability Institute was a key component that was brought up in several of those long-range plans of service. Toward that end, there might be more of a focus on a variety of features here that we would consider in support of that sustainability practice priority. Now, certainly energy efficiency, meeting or exceeding the energy code for insulatory values and mechanical and electrical systems in the additions and so forth, all of those are part and parcel of the numbers that I've already discussed with you. But would we consider, for example, revamping a mechanical system completely to look at a geothermal system in lieu of the existing system? Would we look at photovoltaic installation, even though the financial payback may not be as immediate? It is a strategic thing as a leader in the community that you might do. Those are some things that I'd like you to think about, how strongly you feel about that priority. That last plan of service was 2019 to 2022, so we're still in it. But I recognize that we're coming near the end of that plan of service, and if that is going to continue to be a priority going forward in your other long-range plans of service, that's something, in my opinion, that as we develop these, we should continue to reflect that in options that we consider. So think about that. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to say we're not committed to sustainability, but think about, are we willing to change the budgets, for example, or change the sequence of phasing to reflect moving some of those up on the priority list. Earlier plans of service talked about outreach as a priority as well. This brings up questions of library owning a vehicle or vehicles, or other means and strategies of outreach throughout the community. How big a priority is that? We can plan so much, but we don't want to get caught in a position where we've developed, this is conceptual, this is fine, but if we start to develop this in more detail and then find at the last minute that now we need a place to park 3 outreach vans that are going to go every weekend to Little League games and so forth, where do we put things like that? Because the amount of property available is a finite site. We only have so much to work with, obviously. One of the big ones I would like you to consider, because this is the time to consider it, is whether you do an RFID upgrade. There's a technology component to that, but there's also a significant space component to that, that it is much, much better if we can design it in from the beginning than trying to retrofit that after the fact. RFID is an identification system. I'm trying to simplify the answer for those who may not be familiar with it, of tracking the collection, doing self-check, doing multiple checkouts at a time. It can be used as a security system, although it doesn't have to. It can be used as a sorting system, although it doesn't have to. Crandall Library has one, for example, where you stick the book in, it goes on a conveyor belt, it reads the RFID and kicks it into the children's collection, the videos, the adult collection, and we actually created a glass box around that because kids love to press up against glass and watch the robots do the thing. We're doing something similar at Guilderland right now. Guilderland added it as we went along. It would have been easier had we done that at the beginning. But that I want you to think about that. I know you've had discussions about RFID in the past, and I'm not trying to give you more homework than you need or deserve, but this is the time to talk about that as we complete the master plan and make recommendations, because that, again, is not a decision that's made overnight. There's research into the variety of different types of systems and vendors who provide them. One of the sort of underlying questions that has continued to puzzle me a little bit, the staff has been very forthcoming with answers, but I've been trying to figure out how it fits into the bigger picture, has been the priority of the book sale as a component for the library and the Friends of the Library participation as well. How does that fit into the big picture going forward in terms of participation levels, number of people? Do the Friends group need other space and storage, for example? There are a whole series of questions around that. Books to people at home delivery was another sort of outreach question. Those are the big ones. I actually have a list of 45 questions. You have it already. You can feel free to forward that to everybody. Many of them we sort of answered on the committee level, but some of those were the bigger ones that we thought the board should be aware of and have on your radar. Harmeet, as the head of the committee, have I missed anything in summarizing things here?
I don't think so. So I guess from 10,000 feet, right, we've had the surveys and the charrettes, right, we identified coming out of those what we, internal to the library, and what the community external to the library thought was important, right? Parking, bigger meeting spaces, more smaller meeting spaces, more shelf space, right? So all that data has been collected. We've now taken all that input, identified improvements to the building that address each of those, prioritized them, right? Tried to group them into sort of bite-sized chunks, if you will, right? It's a $4 million bite. And so that's where we are now. I think so when we adopt the plan, right, you know, in a month or whatever it is, we will essentially be saying, these are the priorities, these are the things we're going to do to address the priorities, but we're still at 10,000 feet, right? There's 1,001 details below that, right, that we then have to talk about when we get serious about, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to start the SED process, we're going to hire architects, et cetera. I think that's where we are.
There are, in fact, a lot of details that have to be discussed, including funding sources. We've talked about budget estimates for each of these phases, but the variety of ways in which you would pay for them are varied in an institution such as yours, from traditional fundraising campaigns to work by a foundation, if you had one or created one, to Division of Library Development construction grants, which are administered annually, to a referendum in light of a bond issuance to construct one or all of them. The referendum is obviously the most political of them, because it involves actually a vote of the public, and that is one that you want to be careful. If you were to do a referendum, you would either pick the one that strategically makes the most sense and fund the others differently, or combine them or consolidate them somewhat, because I wouldn't think you'd want to go for a referendum every few years for $4 or $5 million at a time. That's a difficult sell, because even though the amounts might be the same, people will have that perception that you just asked for money. Now you're here for another referendum. We just did the improvements. It would involve a very specific educational program for the community to discuss how this phasing has been developed, or the phasing that we eventually adopt for the master plan, and what the priority and timeline might be. That's another question. Is this something we're trying to accomplish in the next 5 years, the next 10 years? You know, beyond that, trying to put the crystal ball out there. We know, based on many of the trends and statistics that we follow, from a collection perspective and programmatic perspective, we tried to create flexibility here so that even as things change, we can adjust spaces. So, for example, if the teen space is never actually used, we can actually expand the children's library into that space, just as an example of things that happen, or you know, some of the meeting rooms could become different things. Flexibility is key, but this should, we're looking at the 25 to 40-year picture with something like this in its totality. But if we're talking 20 years before we've even reached this in its totality, then obviously it needs to be updated as we go along as well. Okay. I'll leave the thumb drive with you if you'd like, so that you have these slides. It also has my list of conversation topics.
Before you leave, can I just say, I thought I heard you say you would recommend that the board funnel things through the committee, correct? Is that what you're saying? Questions or things through the committee, and then this communication?
In order to have a single source of input, it is better that the committee and or the director feed information directly back to me. Is that what you're asking?
Is that what you were suggesting?
Yes, as opposed to various board members reaching out to me individually with different priorities or different programs. Right. That can be difficult.
What I wanted to propose is something a little different. I had a discussion with Jeff, just so you know. I would like, as we get, I understand that we're still at this view, and so I'm also seeing a certain level of specificity here, although it's not set in stone by a long shot, and I assume that once actual drawings are created, the budget will adjust somewhat. I know as a new board member, I would appreciate additional discussion with the board of even with these schematics, or what are the priorities, how do we all understand the data? And I'm the newest person on here, so I'm trying to study a lot. The priorities of the committee, what does this mean? With even the rough numbers attached, what does that mean? So that I can hear from everyone as a board what their thinking is, and if, not that we have to come to consensus, but I personally am just a real big process. I need more information, and although I trust the committee, and I know you've been putting a lot of time and work, as a trustee, I feel like at this point going forward, I would need to be part of presentations, whether you come to every meeting or not, or however it works, and part of all the discussion, because at this point we're talking about millions of dollars, and we're talking about structures, and I'm just personally not comfortable saying a committee's coming back and saying, well, we had a discussion based on the board, or we're funneling. For me, just having been on a board, and maybe it's just different how this board works, as a trustee, I feel like I need to be part of that conversation. So help me
Yeah,
understand.
I just think it's important that, so we have this draft master planning report in hand, and I think it's important now that there are some numbers attached, because it's easy to talk about. I mean, we hear ideas all the time for years. It would be so easy to X, whatever it is. But you're talking about things that are just out in space, and, you know, there's great ideas, but it's never with dollars attached to them, as you begin to say, and then there's very political questions that have yet to be had about, like, okay, is the community, your impression as trustees, is, you know, what's the community interested in? We've heard what they want. Now we have to try to take that into something that they want to support, right? And I think that process is, we're at day one of that process today. So, so absolutely, I mean, I think however we would want to have that discussion, the discussion needs to happen. It's now time, like, it's game time, right? It's time to have some real discussions about what it is, what are our priorities for the organization, and that's why the services plan has been hanging out, right? So it's there, and it's been sort of a semi-separate thing, but they're really not separate. They all have to be combined together as we try to figure out collectively as a body where it is we want to take this organization for the next, I mean, making decisions that would affect the library for the next 20, 25 years. It's not, you know.
And I understand the point of contact with you, obviously, is because we don't want to, so that can be ironed out, like, you know, who's communicating what and all, but I think for me, the discussion of, you know, what are people thinking, and what does this make sense, and as we sort of narrow down a plan with a budget, you know, how do we engage the community? Do we do community forums? How do we get people on board? I mean, that's down the road some, but I think it's definitely part of the process, but even as a board, just saying, what is the process? From this day one, what is the process? And we don't have to decide that now, but I think for me as a trustee, I'm less comfortable just because of how I process information and make decisions and hear things and feel comfortable with my role. It's less to say, well, the committee discussed it and here's a recommendation. It's like, no, I think at this point, I'm putting out there that the entire board engage in a conversation and start the conversation, okay, so much appreciation to the committee bringing us to this point, but the board engaging in a discussion of, okay, we're going out to a project of some size. And so let's start talking.
Are we going out to the public with a project of some size? Yes. Would be the first question.
First question, okay, and then what size and what budget, and then what's the process, and who's doing this, and who's doing the, and then we get into differing levels of the nitty-gritty as the conversations and session move on. So that's what I'm putting out.
Sherry, have you had access to the historical information of, you know, what has brought us to here? Because I understand this is difficult because it's in medias res. You know, this report is very jumping in. So have you had the
I think
through the
we
committee?
did a tour, and I think I sat into some long-range planning meetings, actually.
Dovetailing off of what Jeff was saying, just a quick question about community input and the charrette. The charrette was great. Loved that process then. The world is a very different place than it was when we did that. I'm going to guess that there will be a process to kind of address that concern at some point.
I don't mean to cut you off.
No.
What I was going to remind everybody is that there is a process described in the original agreement that I have as a library architect with the institution that talks about presenting the information from the master plan back to the community. There are going to be 3 questions. There were always 2 questions this year. There will be 3 questions that will come up, or your conversation is useless. And so while you're absolutely right, these numbers will change and adjust, and they have to reflect the conditions of the economy or the bid environment or a second pandemic, whatever it may be, they always have to adjust. But any conversation that does not involve at least an order of magnitude idea of what costs are is useless. In that people will say, that's great, but how much does it cost? And to get this far and present something to them and say we don't know or it's up in the air sounds duplicitous. It sounds, no one will believe we don't have some idea. So we have to be careful, as you said. It's constantly changing. Here's what we're looking at now. The second thing that people will always ask is, what does this look like? So I've given you some very general floor plan sketches here. What I would want to do as we move forward and present things to the public, should you decide to do that, is we would focus on key areas of the plan, particularly those that involve patron services, so that we can engage them with graphics that make sense to them. Many people can't read a floor plan or understand those things or imagine, and it would be impossible. Even 2 architects might look at the same thing and envision something different out of a floor plan. But having said that, we would try to implement sketches of, for example, how that library of things area works with the new entry. What does all that look like? How does the addition look from the outside, from the lawn area, and so forth? How does this look on the site? The third question that we face all the time now is, how has our awareness of public health changed in the last 2 years, and how is that reflected in the plan? And while I didn't go into detail on it, many of the things that we advocate as library architects, appropriately enough, are actually strategies that are being suggested by many medical professionals in terms of creating smaller reading niches or independent rooms, better mechanical systems with more ventilation and so forth, which were all improvements that we would typically have recommended to begin with. Public libraries, particularly large ones, ventilation systems that remove smell and other issues. So we're in good shape, actually, with a lot of those things, because they would be on the list of recommendations to begin with. But before it went public, we need an idea from the board that this actually does reflect the long-range plan. I hope I wasn't suggesting that the committee decided that already. It was, the committee has worked very hard for the last couple of years to develop this. The board has been updated periodically, but at this point, does this reflect where we're going? Does this reflect the newest version of plan of service? And how and what will we present to the public going forward? So all of that, yes, is still to come. I would also offer, I'm happy to come down to Bethlehem someday. As a new member, I know the institutional memory. Some of you have been through this for 2 years, every meeting, and if they were on the committee, and some have gotten, vague updates, but I'm happy to come down without a quorum, if you'd like me to give you just sort of a walkthrough of the process and what's been done to date and how we arrived, or any of the board members who haven't been on the committee, I'd be more than happy to do that in a less formal setting so that you can ask questions and I can assuage concerns you may have about what we were listening to. Now, the validity of what we were listening to, that's for you to decide. But
I appreciate that. In fact, first time I got those plans, I showed up for a tour, as did multiple trustees. So it gave me a sense that people are still, everyone is at a different place of process of being on board.
Yeah.
It wasn't just me. I mean, a lot of people were coming and saying, walk us through this, so.
No, I was on that tour.
Yeah.
it's a big, big process. I mean, everybody, it would be impossible almost for everybody to be at the exact same space there,
So let me just, I hate to throw out this example, but it's the thing I harp on. So just take one tiny little illustrative question. So the biggest thing that the community told us they wanted was an increase in the size of the traditional collection. And what we have experienced over the past 5 years is a shrinking in use of the physical collection. So what people tell us they want isn't necessarily what they demonstrate to us that they are using. So we have to try to integrate all of that into a thing that is a thing. So
Multiple sources of data.
you got it.
Yeah.
Right.
And then trying to make sense of even contradictory data.
This is the hard.
Yeah.
Right. You got it. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you very much for your time this evening, and again, if you need any further input, let me know. Okay?
Thanks, Paul.
We should plan on catching up at some point, Harmeet and Jeff, but thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good evening.
You too.
Okay, so, next on the agenda is the board organizational meeting. We have annual board authorization.
We do have annual board authorization. So every year, there's just, for Charmaine's sake and everybody, were you here last time? We did this? No, you weren't.
No, but the school district does the same thing.
Okay, so, I need you to vote on the annual board authorizations. This just goes through our attorneys that we're authorized to work with, the insurance brokers, and then the individual authorizations that you allow the treasurer and me and the account clerk to perform some of the financial tasks that we have to do each year.
And this is on page 11.
It is on page 11.
And so Just to confirm, these are all, nothing really is new here.
That is correct.
It's all
Yep.
rollover, so to speak.
You got it.
Okay, so do we need a vote? All right. Okay, so do we have a motion to accept the board authorizations for year 2021-22?
So moved.
And seconded? Caroline? Okay, it's been moved and seconded to accept the board authorizations for year 2021-2022. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, so the next up, when we're talking about the board meetings for 2022, put those up. There is one date that is at question, and it is October. Last year, we had quite an extensive discussion about whether we ought to move off of Columbus Day, as it is Columbus Day. As it turns out, October 11th also happens to fall on Sukkot.
The first 2 days.
First 2 days. So, it was my recommendation that we kick the October board meeting, just to avoid all of those issues, to the following Monday, that would be the third Monday of that month. So it would be the 17th? Well, this is already Tuesday, because the way it's in the list, we kicked it to the Tuesday, so we would want it on the Monday, like our normal Monday, just make it the third Monday of October.
Can I ask why we would go to Monday instead of Wednesday? Is there something else already scheduled? No, you're not.
I don't know. When we move it to the next Monday, because we always meet on Mondays. That's why. I guess just to try, it's either Monday, we move it to the Tuesday, or,
It doesn't.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Because we've always done it that way.
So there will be 3 weeks between the October.
There'll be an extra week that week between the September meeting, which is, well, luckily a relatively late, September 12th is a relatively late board meeting, and then it would be the 17th. Is that right?
So you want to move it to October 17th, is that?
Yes. It's because Tuesday's the 17th. So, sorry, October 11th is the Tuesday, and we're moving to the following Monday, so it's only 6 days more. Did I have that?
I'm looking at 2021, that's why I'm confused. Okay. Oh, I'm confused. Okay.
The February and April dates are don't overlap with school holidays.
Check. But I've missed it before, but I tried to double check.
Yeah, I haven't checked the school holiday schedule yet. So. Next one.
It makes no difference to me.
17th it is.
With that change, we need to vote on.
Okay, so we just need a motion to accept the library board meeting.
Board meeting schedule.
Second. Charmaine? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you. Next to all of you, you have an ethics statement that the trustees sign every year. So
we print and sign and turn it in, and there's no vote or anything?
No,
We
that's
just pass them down, okay.
And then Kristen collects those.
And they go in the public record.
Yep. Let's go. It is the 12th.
So the next is holidays and other closings.
2021 is already set, so these are our proposed closing, holidays and other closings for 2022.
It actually, because it's a Sunday, we don't have to worry about it for 2022. Juneteenth.
Correct.
How Juneteenth will be reflected as a holiday was part of our most recent negotiations, how that will be reflected in the contract. Sunday, that's not an issue. It's more of an issue when it falls on a weekday.
So this would move to being in red as a contractual holiday after, should the vote be successful later. Right. So, and there's one minor change down where the Saturday, December 31st, 2022. So at the bottom right, that is in red, and actually that's closing at 3 instead of 5 on that day, which should be in black because it's not contractual. contractual, but the trustees have traditionally closed at 3 p.m.
Okay, that's New Year's Eve?
Correct. New Year's Day is contractual, New Year's Monday is contractual, because that's the observed holiday, but the Saturday before, we,
Okay, now explain to me the Sunday, Monday thing. Does that have to do with the fact that it's on a Sunday?
correct, and the holiday is on the Sunday, so the first is a Sunday, so then the observed holiday is Monday, we close on the Monday.
Okay.
We're open on Saturday, but instead of being open till 5 like we would on a traditional Saturday, we close at 3 to get everybody home before it gets dark. It's New Year's Eve, there's people driving around out there after 5, so.
And then the library would reopen on a Tuesday, that Tuesday.
Correct.
So is closing at 3 a new contractual? I know historically the board gave it.
It's not contractual, that's why we put it in red, and we shouldn't have, it should be in
Okay.
black. So that's, I was just saying, that's our,
Okay.
we
All right.
made an error on that.
Okay.
That's what should be in black. It's just, it's a closure from the trustee.
21.
So if there's no other concerns, do we have a motion to accept the holidays and closings for 2022? So moved.
As amended is.
Or wait, are you seconding also?
I'm seconding.
All right, so moved. Or motion carries. Next, we have the treasurer's report with Sherry on Zoom. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm in rainy Cape Cod. Anyhow, I'll draw your attention to the reports on, I guess, beginning on page 15. We ended the year with a surplus of $411,631, and that compares to last year's surplus of $373,797. My projection from last month was a little bit off. We had some additional spending this month, mostly in additional purchases for library books and e-collections. I want to draw your attention to a schedule that I added to help identify what makes up the surplus, so that you have an idea of where it came from. And that's on page 16. So you can see that of the 411,000 surplus, 213,000 was attributed to salaries and benefits. That constitutes about almost 47% of the surplus. I know that column on the report might be a little complicated. I indicate it as a percent of variance. It's really a percent of the total variance. So I was trying to show you percentage-wise where the surplus came from, some of the different categories that the surplus came from. So obviously the largest piece comes from salaries and benefits, which as we've mentioned before, is due somewhat to turnover savings and holding some positions open due to COVID. Other areas where we experienced savings was, the other big category was in operations. We experienced about $114,000 in savings, which makes up about 25% of the surplus. And that's mostly in supplies and expenses, special programs, a little bit of savings in utilities. There's a variety of different categories in that line that help to contribute to the surplus. And the other chunk comes from capital expenditures. We had budgeted 125,000. We spent 20 roughly. So we had a surplus there of about 104,000. So this will add to our fund balance, and at some point hopefully we can have a better discussion about the fund balance and what how we want to represent it. I'm working on a history of the fund balance over the past 5 or 6 years. And hopefully I can bring you some information to the next board meeting, and perhaps with a recommendation about what we want, what we can do, what's appropriate to do, what legally we can do. Anybody have any questions about the surplus, about the budget, about the
These are just
the expenditures for
obviously,
this
the
month?
unaudited numbers, so when the auditors come in, the numbers might change a little bit for accruals, et cetera. But, I mean, for now, I know these are very accurate for where we are now.
Right, these are unaudited numbers, and it is possible they might change slightly, but I don't expect any significant changes.
Sherry, quick question. When we look at the variances and you have as a broad category, salaries and benefits, there was an extreme savings there. But when you break that down further, if I'm reading this correctly, each of those 4 categories, salaries, retirement, health insurance, and other benefits, stayed under budget. The one that went over budget was healthcare. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Jeff, the $125K that we budget for capital expenditures,
Yes.
is typically for normal maintenance and replacement activities from the library. So I would expect that number is really more deferred rather than canceled, right?
Yeah, right, because there really wasn't a project of size.
Yeah.
We didn't really have an elevator maintenance repair or carpet replacement or something like that. That's bigger than just a simple repair. But yeah, that doesn't mean that things didn't happen.
Yeah. Okay, so it won't be a surprise if next year's capital expenditure kind of involves a little bit of catch-up, right, sort of above normal, which will come out of that balance.
Well, and I think this year, like, one of the things I'm thinking that hit in there was, didn't we spend a few $1,000s on part of the boiler? Didn't we do like a $5,000 return on the boiler? So that's the type of thing, we have money if we'd had to do a bigger thing with it, but it only ended up being $5,000 monthly. Yes, the tractor, that was it. What was the name?
Scoopy. Very popular, Scoopy, very useful. So we need a vote on that.
That's good, Sherry, thank you. That's helpful.
Good, thank you.
So, if there are no other questions, we just need a motion to accept the treasurer's report.
I will make a motion to accept the treasurer's report as shown on, I guess it's pages 15 to 24, and in particular to approve the disbursements, the proposed disbursements within the package.
Item on our agenda is the personnel report on page 25.
So this one, for the first time in a long time, there are no actions requested. This is not even anything you have to vote on. It is just something for you to be aware of. Those are the positions up above are the ones that are authorized to fill, that are either in process of being filled or being held in abeyance until we're ready to fill them. But there are no new openings for me to propose.
There was one position filled.
We filled it, yeah. That was we filled that in as a temp fill.
Okay. What do you mean by a temp fill? Is it a summer person?
The lists are not where
Oh,
we've been.
okay.
So we have to hire in a certain way that allows us to hire off lists, but then there's limits to how long that can go on, only for 3 months. The lists, I've been told, are in process, and there'll be people on them, and we can. We're trying to get, the goal is for us to get open on Friday nights again. That's the last place where I have a bunch of unfilled holes. We're working on both the library and clerical staff to get us open on Friday night.
Okay, thank you.
So I think based on the status of the list, what's your ETA to actually get most of these filled? Is it a month away or 6 months away?
Well, we're gonna fill them as, so, for some of the positions, like there's some page positions, we're gonna be filling as we need. So the circulation, the physical circulation isn't back where we traditionally would be. So, even though it seems busy, because it hasn't been busy in 18 months, it seems busy, we're not yet to the point where we're, back to even where we were pre-pandemic as far as business. So some of these positions are tied directly to that, but other positions are tied to how busy we are. For instance, on the circulation desk, they have to check in and out items, that are being checked out, but also we need coverage at certain times to be able to open the library. So, we stole shamelessly from our Friday night people to be able to open, the rest of the day, so we're open there. Now we're going to backfill some of those positions. So that's where we are. Some of them I don't have any intention to fill super fast. We'll fill them as we need them, but most of these will be filled. Let's say things keep going as they're going to be awesome and everything's going to be fantastic for the rest of the year. We would certainly hope to be filled back up to full strength by the end of the year.
Pages are unpaid, right?
No, pages are paid.
Pages are paid. Pages are not covered by the union contract?
So we're ready for the director's report. Starts on page 26.
So much already. All right, let me get my head back in the game as far as the director's report is concerned. So, the gardens are beautiful. People are using it out. If it would stop raining, we could actually do some outdoor programs. That would be super nice. So the fines were reinstituted on July 1st. There was some comments online. We had some people that were confused about the particular way that things were implemented, and apologetic. The circulation staff is absolutely prepared to be gentle and understanding about all of the issues that people have with circulation, but we have to get things started if we're going to get them started. So that's been started.
I have to say, I read some of those comments. I was happy to see the support from the community. That came through. And I respect the people's opinions that were confused, but I was very happy to see support.
There was also no way that process was ever going to happen where everyone walked in and was like, oh, I get it. I completely know what to do. I have no questions, no comments, and I'm completely happy with this. There was no chance that was going to happen.
And I hate to be the guy to blame a computer system for something like this, but there are certain ways that the system has to operate because the system exists, and in ways that we don't control. There aren't settings for us to control how things have to work.
The only way to make this happen was to do it and accept what came.
So there they are. We did have a patron that was concerned about the fact that our museum passes are available to everybody from all over the Upper Hudson Library System, but museum passes at every library all over the Upper Hudson Library System isn't necessarily available to people who aren't from their library. They felt that was unfair, and I absolutely understood that it was unfair. We used to have that policy where we restricted them to Bethlehem only. We changed that because our closest and largest trading partners opened up theirs to our patrons. So the large libraries in Albany County, which are the ones that impact our patrons the most, do allow our patrons to use their museum passes. And so picking out an individual library and saying no to you just adds complexity to the circulation desk. And I don't even know if we could make the system do that. So that's why occasionally there are libraries that do or don't offer a particular thing, but I think it's a relatively minor impact. And those libraries that, again, our patrons are most likely to go to, and we know where they go, Guilderland and Voorheesville and Albany and Colony, all play well in the pool. I just wanted to bring that up because the patron was very concerned. I think he went away happy, but had a concern. So there that is. And then just generally speaking from that 10,000-foot view, a lot of services are restarting. We are not all the way back yet with everything, but if you look around the library, things are starting to look like we expect things to look around the library. There's more computers, and there's just generally more services for people as they come in to use it. We had more people in the building on Tuesday and Thursday of last week than we have had since February 2020. So we had more than 600 people, 626, 618.
Temperature outside those days.
It was, you know what, the temperature wasn't so bad, because that was the week before, but it was rainy and nasty, so people came in, and it was nice. We had a woman about her small child, and the small child was screaming, which We haven't heard screaming baby in a year. I was like, she's like, oh, I have to leave. And we're like, no, you don't have to leave. Like, we are delighted that there are children and activity and all of that thing in the library. So really, there was a fundamental change just last week where we've been getting busier and busier and busier and busier and busier. And the last week, it actually felt like summer in here a little bit, where the people on the circuit desk are like, oh, it's super busy. It's nice. That's a difference. So, summer reading program that we've been talking about is kicked off and officially going, so there's lots of that. If we could have more outdoor programming this week, we just have to keep canceling a bunch of outdoor programs, so I'm sorry about that, members of the public, but we don't control the weather, unfortunately. And then lots of good outreach. I think it's interesting. We went to the farmer's market, and sort of our story has been, a lot of people that go to the farmer's market say, oh, so awesome that you're here. I'm headed over there in just a few minutes. I'm going to check out some more books. But really, they found a lot of people who didn't know we were open. So it's just another venue for us to say, hey, by the way, like, when are you going to open back up? Like, we've been open for months. You can come right on in, come back to the library. So just another good opportunity for us to engage with our public. That's that example of outreach, right? So lots of awesome programs. They're in there for you to read. I will not go through every one of them, but we do continue virtual programs. Once we've figured out how to do virtual programs, we're not going to stop doing them, though certainly from a number standpoint, they're going to be fewer than they had been in the past. So just some great pictures from the programs, and then this is the first month ever that our e-collection has been over 100,000 items, so that's a lot. So that is, that we broke that barrier last month, and items do fall out of that collection, but generally it's up and not down. New board games and new Library of Things, more of the Library of Things that had been sequestered and not available for use because they might touch people's faces, like Oculus Rift or microphone for the karaoke machine, are back and available for the public. So we're just saying that there's now an individual choice that someone can make if they want to take that out or not. But they're certainly available for people to use, and we have added an 8mm film digitizer. Family films, and they want to convert those to electronic format.
Is that new?
It is new.
Okay.
So we'll have one available for checkout and one that's available when the makerspace gets started back up, where people can come in and convert those. So the VHS to DVD converter is still super popular. Don't know how many, still a ton of big VHSs out there running around. So, and then the app that I mentioned is real nice, and it does allow people to check out their items from their phone. And I love it. It's awesome. So just like Sam's Club or whatever, you can go and check your stuff out. It's got your card in there, and the card stays in the app, so if you forget your card at home, as lots of people get upset when they don't have their card, they have their phone. Barcode's right in there. Yeah, and then I just did want to point out that we did have a emergency repair to the air conditioning during that hottest week that we had, where we had to replace some condensing fan motors and a pressure sensor. It was $138 over my limit, so I went through our purchasing policy, talked to Mark and Sherry, sought their authorization, but I have to report it back at the board meeting. There's the report. So we completed that repair. The air conditioner is still functioning. That makes me happy to have air conditioning. I think there would have been some major grouchy people. It turns out we have 4 compressors on each one of those machines, so only 2 of them were not working on that particular unit, so we still had 2, but the hotter it gets, the more likely it is to kick on a third. Rarely it kicks on a fourth, so we never lost air conditioning, but
How are we doing with train? Are we satisfied with them?
I am satisfied with them. I mean, so I think there's some limitations. I do not want to talk about HVAC too much at this meeting, but you can feel in here, like, it's kind of swampy in here, right?
I don't think it's terribly loud.
It's not loud. So they've done a lot of good work to make improvements. I think there are some fundamental limitations, but I think we're very quick answer, we're very satisfied with train. They're very happy with it.
All right, good. I mean, they've, like, the noise thing is incredibly better. Good. All right.
We're used to this now. We've been hearing this for like 2 years, so, but it's
been louder in here.
It's been louder in here. It was like a jet engine in here.
Before the pandemic, you couldn't hear. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't mean to defer.
It's perfectly fine. The statistics are in there about our e-content. We'll talk about that at some point in the future. We'll do a wrap-up of just general circulation trends for the whole year. I've been harping on physical audiobooks. It's just, there's physical audiobooks on CD just keep going down, and that's all moving online, and that's, lots of other trends like that. I did want to point out circulation. It's a great, you can compare year-over-year circulation trends, like 19,000% increase because we weren't open last year. So just outreach and programs, attendance back, if not all the way back to pre-pandemic normal, just getting to a much more comfortable level where we expect our programs to be, which is awesome. Circulation back much closer where we would expect it to be, and then computer signups, big percent changes. But you look at particularly on page, my statistics report, which is on page 35, down towards the bottom, there's a block that starts with e-book use, e-audiobook use, e-magazine use, and streaming video use. Every one of those categories is lower than it was last year. So you think about where we were last year in June of the pandemic. A lot of people were still really, really using our electronic resources. They still are, but to a very, very high level. It was a major spike from sort of March to that June. The only one of those that's still up year over year, e-audiobook use. So I keep harping on e-audiobooks, even compared to when we were such a spike last year in downloadable everything, electronic use everything, when the world was shut down, e-audiobooks are still higher than that last year because, listen, people don't have CD players in their cars. So.
I also think the pandemic forced people who weren't audiobook people to go to it, and they never went last.
Right. Yeah, because I think because mostly, not all, but mostly audiobooks get listened to in cars. Once you figure out how to do that on your phone, hook it up through Bluetooth in the car, most people are not going back on that, right? So.
Okay. Great, thanks, Jeff. All right, so we're ready to hear the UHLS report from Lisa.
Well, it's fun to report. The construction grants are out. I haven't heard anything from you, so I'm assuming we're not doing anything. They did mail the annual reports. I see Jeff's got a pile of them. If you want personal copies and he doesn't have enough, we can get more. So,
It was really interesting information to go through.
Yeah, Donna does.
The library board, it's interesting. It was interesting to me.
Right, no, I agree with you.
Thank you.
Jeff, I have one question before we go to new business. Demco is...
That's going to be my proposal for the...
Oh, we haven't gotten to it yet. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, sorry.
Soon. Okay. The next item is new business, and first is collective bargaining agreement.
So there's an MOU that has been distributed to everybody. As you know, last Friday, the union voted to accept the terms of that memo of agreement. They voted to say yes, and now that is in front of you to accept that as well.
Lisa and I think, I'll speak on, we were pleased with the outcome of this. We think that, we came out where we thought we would be in terms of the economic package that we were able to offer, and I think that Jeff can speak to the fact that all of the changes, all the administrative changes, all the scheduling changes are workable for us, and I think really favorable to both sides. I think, we're happy, I know you guys have seen the proposal, we're happy to answer any questions, but without getting bogged down in the discussion, I just want to say that moving forward, a key point that we did negotiate was a 2-year agreement instead of a 3-year agreement, which works for everyone, just brings everyone back to the table earlier, and I think it kicked a conversation down the road to some extent. And on that point, I think that as a board, we need to think about the next contract starting now, as connected to the long-term planning presentation that we had, finding out what the union's priorities are moving forward and what our priorities are moving forward and how that all fits into our financial picture is something that we have to consistently think about, and I think was a big learning tool from this particular negotiation. Healthcare is going to be a big part of the next discussion. We promised that we would bring that point back to the board, and that is us doing this, is that appears to be a priority for the union. I will say, that none of those asks are unreasonable per se. no one is asking for anything that is, you know, out there like, oh my gosh. At the same time, we have to balance that with our fiduciary duty and with our budget. But to that end, I think that it is worth soliciting some information from the union moving forward as much as we can, so that going into the next round of negotiations, that we have a clear understanding of what their priorities are, we have a clear understanding of what our priorities are, and that the negotiations can take place with that foundation already built, so that they are pure negotiations, because I think that a lot of this process was finding out what everyone really thought. And that, in my personal opinion, was a time waster. So, you know, just keeping communication open over the next 2 years, and understanding our priorities, understanding our budgets, and understanding their priorities. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can stop thinking about for the next 2 years. We have to really think of it, like, I don't want to put it on as an agenda point on every meeting, but something maybe every other meeting.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, unless things have changed, management has a pretty good rapport with the union, so building on that with communication and talking along. And, you know, historically, the board doesn't have issues we want to bring. We just wait for them. The board doesn't usually have issues that we want to get back. We don't usually come to them and say, we want, a salary give back or anything like that. We don't usually have things. But we may have things that we want to talk about among ourselves ahead of time, and things that we may want to see structurally changed. And sometimes if they're looking for a big thing, that's like with this, that's time for us to bring things to the table that we want to work in. So there's a lot that we can talk about. So I think that's great to be looking at it sooner rather than later. And sharing it with them, like you said.
Exactly. And I think the union is very aware of these meetings. I don't think we want to underestimate that at all. They're very aware of our budget, they're very aware of our surplus, they're very aware of, you know, our conversations. So, and I think that that's a detriment to us in some way, and that we don't have the same visibility into the union, which is fine. But again, I think it's about keeping those lines of communication open. And just one other thing that I would say in terms of how we discuss this moving forward and how we think about it moving forward, I think as a board it's easy to remove ourselves a little bit from the process. You know, we have a fiduciary duty. We are representing the library. We are representing a concept in a lot of ways. The union and the union representatives are negotiating from a very personal standpoint. Your health care, your salary, your days off, those are the most personal things to you in a lot of ways. They significantly affect your day-to-day life. And I think it's very important that even as we think about things like fiduciary duty and, you know, our long-term plan and how we're going to pay for all of that, is to remember those things in how we think about this next round of negotiations. So, my piece on that.
And also, we know that the staff are at the heart of the library, and how much the budget goes towards staff, so it makes sense. I also just want to also echo the whole thing about communication and financial discussions early on, because I realize if we approve this, we're approving something we haven't budgeted for. You know, basically, because Sherry had provided information about that. So I know negotiations have certain time frames and all the rest, but I think going forward it would be helpful to know kind of general figures or ballparks as we go into a budget process, so that we stay as close to the budgeted amount. We can account for as much as possible the amount of a contract within the budget we're developing.
I don't agree. I think that historically, there was always a real push to get it done. Got to get it done before the budget. Got to get it done before the budget. I think that's a false deadline.
Yeah.
I think that unless we are talking about some huge salary increase or, some real big out of unknown, we can absorb it.
Yeah. Maybe I misspoke, or it's not a matter of pushing or rushing things, but it's having the communication along the line, so we can have a vision down the road of what might be coming.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I want to reiterate that Sherry has, everyone has looked into the financial implications of everything here. They are, I would describe as more than doable within our current parameters. And to some extent, it's analogous to the contingencies that Paul was describing. You know, if it's part of a negotiation process, there's always going to be where you say, well, we can do that or we can't do that, but that gets done.
Sure. And I also, being someone who enjoys the process and the discussion of the board, welcome opportunities for the board to be talking about its priorities and what it's looking for down the road, you know. This is my first contract negotiation, I kind of jumped right, you know, as a new, and, so I would welcome opportunities for the board to have even more discussions.
And if you remember, we budgeted an additional contingency in the budget for next year. And if we continue to keep that line, that's exactly the kind of thing the contingency could be used for, is, you know, additional salary costs that weren't previously budgeted because we negotiated a contract that was a little bit higher than what we had planned.
Great, thanks, Sherry.
Yeah, just a final point, I just want to make clear that the union negotiated. They gave, they got. And I think that is the best thing you can say about the end of it, is that I don't think there's any clear winner here. I think everyone walked out of this with what they needed at this moment.
Thank you. And thank you both for participating.
Thank you.
Well, that's what I was going to say too, is thanks to our policy committee members, because they've expended a lot of personal time and effort through this contract process on behalf of the library, so thank you.
Right, the negotiating committee, right? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so do we have a motion then to accept the union contract as presented?
I will make that motion. I make a motion to.
So then, all those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed?
I was gonna say, you just want to clarify. Yeah.
To be clear, motion carries.
We can do this without Mark, because we have a quorum.
Yeah, you've got
We have a
4.
quorum,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And actually, we talked to Mark about that exact thing.
Okay.
For this
Want to
meeting.
make sure it goes through without any questions.
Yeah, no, we
Yeah.
talked that through with him, and he echoes his support, obviously not official support here, so.
Happy to make that a unanimous decision.
All right, so I have for you, copies of my proposed MC salary increases for the year. You will not be surprised to learn that the increases exactly match the now accepted increases from the union contract, your official record.
So, I'm sorry, these are projected salaries or current salaries, or?
That's the salary that I'm proposing be the annual pay for the MC staff members, including a 2% cost of living adjustment, which is what was included in the now accepted union.
And these get approved annually, is that the?
Yeah, and because the MC staff don't have a union, I put forward my proposal. It won't surprise you that
So it would be the COLA, any step that they would be entitled to based on how long they've been here, and any longevity based on, generally, I don't know if there's been exceptions, but you would be recommending somebody who had been here X number of years would get a longevity payment. So all those pieces would be built into this.
As presented,
May I make a motion?
all those in favor, raise your hands. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
The next is updates to the phased reopening plan.
Okay, so that is, I sent you an email, but it's also posted to our website for anybody who's following along, playing along at home, right next to the board agenda. Actually, I can bring it up on the screen so we can all look at it at the same time. Is that easier?
Sure.
Okay, give me a second. Oh, I can do it here and then share it. Look at that. Oh, my goodness. So amazing. Okay. Use my...
Check out your chicken.
Hmm?
Don't have your chicken.
No, yeah, fair enough. It happened. So up on the screen are actually my changes to the phased reopening plan, current phase, which is phase 6. All of you, none of these should come as a surprise. We've been doing almost all of this since 3 days after the last board meeting when the world significantly changed and a lot of our executive orders dropped off. So I'll just run really quickly through there. It's this document, should the world continue to move in the direction that I need it to for my sanity, and fingers crossed, This document is going to come to its natural conclusion here fairly soon. So we are in the next to last phase, which is phase 6. Just saying that the code restrictions are completely lifted in accordance with guidance from New York State. Masks are not required for staff or patrons, or any staff member or public may choose to wear a face mask. We still have no toys in the children's area. We're still not gathering inside unvaccinated children in areas of high concentration, but children can obviously be in the library. So that's just one last little thing we're not doing. Furniture is beginning to return to the children's place. If you go in there now, you'll see some more comfortable seating. I had occasion to come out and watch a grandmother reading to a child sitting at a study carrel because there were no soft seating in the children's place. And I'm like, well, that's ridiculous. We're going to put some chairs over there for people to sit and read to children. So that's there now. We'll continue doing hand sanitizer. Masks are available for all staff and public. I got a lot of masks, thousands and thousands of masks. We'll continue towards moving the layout back to the just traditional layout of the library with some modifications. Work from home shifts are now only at the needs of the library. Should someone be placed under quarantine or something like that, that's the only time we would be using that. Updated social distancing guidelines so people, staff have returned to their traditional work areas. Cleaning products remain available. Obviously, phones are cleaned in between users. We still aren't letting the public use our phones yet. We're not quite there. Still only prepackaged food if we have programs. If we're doing any food at programs, it would only be prepackaged for a little while longer. Indoor book drops are open, obviously. Reservations for the public meeting rooms begin tomorrow, so people are reserving them already. But this is the last meeting before the public can have access to these rooms. So that all begins tomorrow. Study rooms are available. The Library of things are back. Fees for printing and photocopying have returned. Modified procedures for public PC, so we're still only doing an hour because I don't have all my computers out there, but we're getting there. Laptop checkout is back, and then in-person board meetings as allowed under law. Here you are, thank you. And then indoor public programs may resume. For instance, if Evening on the Green gets rained out 2 days in a row, we may bring that in here and do Evening on the Green for those people who are comfortable coming into a room, as long as the performers are also comfortable coming into a room to do that, because their contracts were for outside performance. And then the last phase that we are not to yet would be just sort of complete return, the sort of end of this document, and I think we probably would have a little bit more of a formal acceptance of that. When we guessed and wrote this document more than a year ago, I don't think we knew exactly what we were working with, but I'm pleased that I think this document has stood us in good stead in the meantime. So everything in yellow is a modification from the last time you voted on this, but has been implemented for nearly a month now successfully. So I would welcome a vote on that.
How many internal programs have we had in the past month?
Inside?
Yeah.
None yet.
Okay, so we're
No, it's still not.
So we're proposing to allow them.
I would allow it now, because I still have my emergency powers. I would allow them now if we can't force people into a program. So, by choice, this summer programs are outside. By necessity, given the rain, we may move some of them inside. More likely with a general audience or adult program than with a children's program, which we were more likely to just cancel. Does that make sense? And that's a great question, actually. Would you be comfortable with this room and 30 or 40 children in here running around, and their parents?
I mean, the answer is I don't know.
I don't know either, and I don't think many of our public members know either. So, we'll.
What was the thing that I saw in Paul May's packet about the occupancy rates?
Yeah.
And what we call occupancy and what he says code is? Like, this room was like ridiculous.
109.
But what does code say?
They did that work. Part of this work was they reworked what the actual occupancy is.
Oh, I misread it then. I thought it said code in this room was like 35, and we said it was 109.
No, we say it's 90, and they're saying it's not 90, it's 109, because...
Okay, so I thought we had, like, we were way over on
No,
something.
we're
I
actually,
did not read it properly.
we're quite And they're saying because the furniture in here is occasional, it's all of it movable, there's no fixed seating in here. When those original calculations were made, they were probably made with seating that would have been fixed to the floor, more like an auditorium or something, as opposed to chairs that could be kicked out of the way if people are freaking out. So, with the seating and the type of furniture that we have in here, the occupancy rates are actually a little higher. We can leave them right where they are, but they increase for both the story hour room and the boardroom, quite a bit, so we can, yeah, no, I was pleased with that outcome, because it was getting an official answer, turns out to be difficult, so having an architect stare at that and really go through the code makes me feel a lot better. But that's not what you're voting on tonight.
Okay. So
Questions?
any other questions? Do we need a motion to accept the changes to the phased reopening plan? Second. Lisa? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carries. Do we have any other new business?
Not for me.
Okay, so we'll move on to old business. The library book drop on
Okay.
page 36.
Not like HVAC, but close. We're talking about this for a really long
So there is a proposal in the packet for a Demco book drop. Please let me buy this. I will pay, if that's what you'd like. The proposal is with 2 extra carts, because it's a 2-sided book drop. It's the biggest one that we can get, and it comes with 2 carts. We are proposing 2 extra carts. That's the price that's over the, the $6,700. So total price.
Would go in the same place?
Same.
So it doesn't need a new concrete?
It does, no, because what I was trying to do was fit the shed from that lot over there on that spot. So I wanted to have a new concrete poured so we could throw that on there. And that concrete doesn't exist. I have no idea. It's, yeah.
This is a better idea.
This is a permanent idea, or this is a 5-year idea.
About throwing them in.
Correct.
They don't like throwing them in.
No, people don't like.
How many people have asked me, do
Yeah,
I really just drop it? I'm like, yeah.
I'm like, there's a ramp in there, we built a whole ramp to sort of gently escort them into the thing, but it's not as gentle as a real book drop with a depressible book card and the whole, so it's, because we're open now inside, the reason so many things were being returned outside was we weren't using the indoor book drop at all, right, that was closed, because we were still quarantining. Now that the indoor book drop is reopened, the outdoor book drop can go back to being its normal, very busy, but less incredibly busy self. And this is the one I want.
What is the size of this compared to the size of the one outside? This looks like it's smaller.
It's twice as big for capacity, from a capacity.
From a capacity standpoint,
Not of the
okay. It
shed.
looks like the big,
It's not as big as the shed,
that's
right,
what I was
but
gonna say,
it's,
the capacity is probably bigger, that was
yeah,
what, yeah.
So
Okay.
twice as big from capacity.
Okay, well, that's gonna be, people are gonna say, it's smaller, that's why my book won't go in, yeah.
Each side, right, so the,
Is it big enough that we don't have to lock the outdoor book drop when we're closed?
we won't routinely close it. It may well still, fill up over a holiday weekend, so.
I'm confused, I thought we were talking about the outdoor book drop, that's what I
Yeah,
thought we were
that's
talking
what
about.
The 2, have you opened this one?
No, no, not the through garage book drop, it's not yet open. We're using the shed.
Will you be opening that when you put the other one in? So that's what's open on the weekend.
Correct. It's the outside remote book drop that's.
That green one, that big green monster, yes.
Not the green one, that's the Better Road Book Stand.
Oh, no, it's gray, it's gray. I'm talking about the one, I was thinking that was green, no, it's gray, yes, okay.
So we need a motion to accept the purchase of a new book drop. Second? So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carries. Okey-doke. Future business. I know Charmaine would like to have further discussion on,
Well, I'm trying to get a sense of what the process is for the you know, we've raised it a few times, like, so what does that look like? Is it gonna be on the next agenda or a future I know you said it's tied to some of the plans. I know it's come up a number of times, even in the budgeting, so what do people wanna do with that?
I mean, I think that's a very good question, and this is, you know, here's where I am, sorry Mark isn't here, because he should also be on this discussion, but he can watch later. You know, the long-range plan committee has put a lot of work into thinking about what's the building, what does that work, you know, integrate those thoughts from the public. There is work to be done on the services plan from a board standpoint about, and that, you know, sort of assume the master plan about what's the direction of the library, big questions. What are we doing in the next 5 years, the next 3 years? The services plan that I've proposed goes out the next 3 years. And that discussion really naturally very much falls into that discussion about services. And so if you know, to give space to the fine question, you know, I want to take time to make that discussion, and I'm having trouble finding a way to make that work. I think there needs to be space to discuss some of these larger issues, and I think we as a group need to think about how we have those discussions and have time to, you know, we have to run the library and we have to pay bills and all of these things that I make you come here and do every month. But also we need to have some discussions, some really quite deep discussions about what it is we want the library to be and what it is we want the library to do. You know, in that, Paul Mays talked a little bit about the sustainability initiative. There's some equity and social justice initiatives in the services plan. We can't do everything, but we need to decide, like, what is it that we want this thing to be? And that's a big discussion that needs to happen. And it's time for us to have that. And whether that's, you know, a retreat or a special board meeting or tacking onto the regular board meeting, it's time to have those discussions. And so I don't, you know, it's up to all of you. I can propose options, but
we have a draft of the services plan, or is the intent that we would have a retreat to develop?
No, the draft of the service plan, so from the one that the staff has prepared, you've got, and we can share that back out, you know, not, well, I think it's in one of the board packets, so it's out there, it's not a secret, right? So it's, you know, very much a draft, and, you know, some of those questions, like Michelle had a question about the passport, and, you know, Paul said, oh, you dropped it in your services plan, and I said, it's an active discussion, like, passports are great. In light of COVID, we were like, maybe the time isn't for passports, maybe the time is to take on some other things. But it doesn't mean that's not important. And if the board is like, no, passport's super important, let's get on that, then we can do almost any of this stuff. You know, and one of Harmeet's points, which is, what do we stop doing? Because there's a capacity that exists, and we can do a lot of things with the organization. And what is it that we where do we want to get to, and then our discussion of what do we stop doing in order to be able to get there, what do we want to be. So those are hard, and I'm sorry about that. It's a difficult questions, but I think the discussion is important. It's one of those times when it's, you know, the talking, not just from Jeff, talking is important.
Well, it's also kind of my understanding that board meetings oftentimes is the business of it's a public business meeting of the business of the library and motions and considering issues. I think what you're looking for is sort of a more substantive discussion philosophically and to give direction to you and the staff of the library. If that services plan is in draft, then perhaps it could be a jumping off point for a meeting, retreat, whatever, and if we're considering the retreat option, I would consider a facilitator outside of the board. So who just would be keeping the things rolling, helping with the discussion and all the rest. It's just, I've seen it used, I'm a facilitator, but I've also seen it used in retreats so that all of us can be full participants and no one's responsible for managing the process. But that's just something I would put out.
I would actually second that. I think a long time ago, I now feel like I brought that up, so maybe the first year I was on the board. And I agree that having somebody outside is much more productive. productive than asking someone who is more invested to try to rein everything in.
The services plan is not the whole long-range plan.
That's correct, because it doesn't include any of the master plan, the facilities. The union of those two things together.
I would suggest that we think about how we come to a consensus on some portion of something to say we have a completed master plan, okay? There are things in it that I think are important to have documented. If control agencies come and say, well, you haven't looked at this for 8 years. Oh, trust me, we've been looking at it, but we've been doing this about it. So I think there should be ways that we can say, this is what we looked at, this is what we have acted on and decided on, and this piece is still in flux, okay? But I think we need to get some, and there can be pieces of the service plan maybe that we can say in process, but I think we need to get something executed to a degree where we can say these pieces are done.
Well, I think the master planning report, I just want to say, I think I was very pleased with the outcome of this report. It's dense, and it's a lot of it. But a lot of those questions about have you considered, have you thought, and again, and it's abundantly clear in there that there are decisions for discussion that have been talked about so that some number can be arrived at, so you can begin to talk about the scope of what's being discussed. But there's, it's abundantly clear in here that's the, just like Harmeet said, we're at that 10,000-foot level, and then there's some discretion. And maybe, please, Paul, that I said, is this a thing that we want to do? Do you want to move forward with some larger project? That assumption isn't made, and I think that's a big decision that has to be made, and we have to come to that. But we can accept this report or the finalized version of this report. That doesn't necessarily say the board is agreeing that this project is happening. I think what we've done is asked an architect to integrate the information that we took from the community, which was the best thinking at the time, and asking them at the time, the best information that we have, and say, what would be some remedies that you might propose that could be done to a building that would begin to meet some of those needs? And then we did talk in a vacuum with no price tag for so long that there's a price tag there. So now you can at least anchor that, and then does that become the jumping off place as you make a decision about the architect? You say, you know what, this plan is good. I think it's, that's the heart of where we're going. We're going to move forward with that architect, or, how you decide to move forward with an architect. Those things are all TBD, but it's, I think the report, having read through it, I'm more pleased with the tone of the report than I was worried that I might be. So I'm actually quite pleased with the product, and that can be accepted without necessarily having that decision, because it's a synthesis of the thinking that has gone into how might we meet the remedy, and then there's much more information about existing conditions than I was worried we might get. So I'm actually very pleased with it. Someone's like, oh, did it get lost in here that there's an asbestos ceiling in the hallway? No, it's right in there, as is the tilty bricks and the windows. So it's all in there. So
I think there's a good distinction of that we accepted the report. That's it. Right now, it's accepted the report. And I think just as we go forward, if we're discussing the master plan, to be mindful of how much we should be doing in public. To be transparent and for our duties on how much could be done in a retreat. So
I think there might be some people that are surprised to see the numbers that are in that report when they're watching this meeting. It's not a secret. It's just, if you were to do what the people who were coming to those charrettes were talking about, that's an amount of money, and it's not even everything. That's a good point that has to be made and help us as we try to figure out the direction where we're going.
I think your point about reporting in some way, in a master chart or something like that says, we considered this, this was the issue, this is what we did to consider it, this is what we decided. I think that is very important for really kind of everything that we're talking about tonight. It's important for how we move forward with the master plan. It's important for how we budget, for how that moves forward when we bring that information to the public, if we need to bring a bond or referendum or something else, or when we're going to donors. I think it affects, you know, even our next round of negotiations, where, you know, one side says, you have this X amount of dollars, we say, well, we have X amount of dollars, this is where this is going, this is how it's been considered. Because it's, you know, as productive as these meetings are, and they are extremely productive, and we've even streamlined them a great deal. When we engage in these processes, you know, making huge changes, the questions that people are going to have is, you did what? What did you do? How did you arrive here? And having a roadmap to give them, I think, is not going to limit or, you know, stop questions or comments or, you know, critiques, but at least it presents where we've been and what we've done in a concise way.
Well, some of the very deliberative financial decisions that were made by boards past, previous directors and previous boards that, you know, said, oh, we're consciously and specifically saving money to be able to redo the parking lot, so the parking lot project, and adding the spaces to the parking lot. And then after that, very consciously and deliberately saying, we know that there's going to be work that needs to be done on the HVAC because that is aging. That money, we're going to go for a bond or we're going to save it. Well, I think it's possible for us to say that was the decision at the time. Very conscious and deliberate thoughts on that. And this board can also make the same conscious and deliberate thoughts to say, this is where we see ourselves financially, this is the goal that we have for ourselves, and, you know, and there's a couple ways of getting to that goal. How do we get there?
A lot of it is just reframing it for the public or whoever the audience is, because board minutes are tremendous and it's a traditional way of doing things, and thank you very much for doing them. I think it's horrible, it's a tedious process, but you don't immediately, a lot of people do not read board minutes, and even those that do, it's hard to pull out exactly what the action items were in them, or to distill how much work went into arriving at everyone saying yes to something or saying no to something. So it's just kind of reframing the same information for the public.
So perhaps a future item for next meeting could be discussion of, whatever you want to call it, additional board meeting, board retreat. Maybe people know to bring their calendars. So the question is the decision on whether you want one, we want one, and then the date of it, and then the focus of it. Like, what would be the kind of central issue document project that the board would be? Does that make sense to folks for a future business meeting to decide?
It sounds like the top of the list right now would be a dedicated discussion or meeting on the service plan, with the proposed service plan, to make sure that, number one, it includes everything that we think it should include, right, which may be an infinite loop discussion, but then secondarily, to make sure that there's nothing in the services plan that contradicts or needs to be added to what we talked about in the building plan.
Right. I mean, I take that as a perfect example. We have staff kicked around for years that we'd love to have a van pop up sides, we drive up someplace, and it would be a party. Like, the van is okay. It's not exactly a party, right? A gray Chrysler minivan is not the most exciting vehicle to pull up with our very stately Bethlehem Public Library stenciled on the side, right? It's not the point of that. That van's job is mostly driving around books to people books, to the people who are getting their books, and then occasionally making it run to the dump, where we treat it like a truck. So if that's a thing that we want to do, and the discussion of the expense of the staff time to do outreach is incredibly expensive service, is that important enough that we're going to do that, dedicate the staff time, then there's no reason you wouldn't dedicate space in the building master plan to figure out, like, what is that, and what do we need, and how many do we have, or, you know, where do we park it, all of those things, so.
I would agree with that, Hermie, just jumping over it, and I'm not sure if everyone else would. So that's why I would say, like, what would be, the discussion would be, are we going to do it, time and date, and then what would be so it gives people time to think about what would be the central, and then the facilitate, you know.
I would like to have the actual plan as it exists now in draft forwarded again. I'm sure I have it someplace, I couldn't put my hands on it, just to give myself an idea of what we're going to be talking about.
Would you like, I mean, because I know we've had this discussion about physical copy. Anybody who wants a physical copy, I will absolutely.
Yeah, sure, I'll take one too.
But I'll forward it again.
I mean, it's not that long.
It had like priorities, like, because it said like these kind of goals.
Oh, it's 3 pages? I don't need a
Yeah.
physical copy, no. I thought it was going to be long. 80 pages.
50 to 52 from last month.
Okay.
Can I ask, are there facilitators available through Upper Hudson Library?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm sure there are.
We'll do it. So, we'll talk about.
So you think about the option, you think come with options of,
I mean, I'm sure they have people. I'll talk to you later about.
would be using with the school district, because the school district uses facilitators, and if we're a school district library, would we have access?
I'm just gonna ask,
Catherine's gonna make copies. Okay, very good.
The one I have from May is 20 pages, not 3.
What?
The one I have from May is 20 pages, not 3.
Yeah, I think that may be the summary. Catherine's gonna go make a copy, so she's gonna print those off.
You're working from the summer, you're on from the
Well, that's
footnote.
all that was in it.
I
I wanted to make myself a note that I needed to look at it.
Let me make sure there's no public participation. Nothing.
Okay. All right, so it's 8:18. This meeting stands adjourned at 8:18 PM. Next meeting is August 12th. Thank you.
Ninth.
Do you need a motion? I think we need a motion. I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
The next meeting is August 9th, not August 12th.
Oh, that is my fault. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
We'll fix that.
Sam, back
No, it's Millie's birthday, that's why I know exactly what that means.